Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining another DevTest community webcast. Today our presentation is going to be on the integration between TDM and the DevTest products. Today, giving the presentation is Daniel Mazet. He's the Associate Engineering Services Architect for the DevTest products. If you have any questions as we're going through today's session, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We'll get to them as soon as we can. If you have any questions that you would rather ask over the phone as opposed to typing into the Q&A box, we will open the line up at the end of today's session for verbal questions. So if you have any questions you'd rather ask on the phone, you can just hold them until the end of today's session. I'm now going to turn the call over to Daniel. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mel. So my name is Dan Mazet. I'm a services architect with the Continuous Delivery Business Unit, one of the 4 business units that CA has. And we focus on continuous delivery of products. TDM and DevTest are some of the products under our business unit. And we've got some nice integration, actually, with quite a few of the products, thanks to some of the REST APIs we've got. So we're going to go over that today. I don't want to spend too much time focusing on TDM or DevTest specifically, but more around the integration and configuration of the integration between the two. This presentation will be posted on the communities, and I believe recording will be posted of this meeting and this demo as well, so you can refer back to it later. But I'm going to take about 10 minutes now to go through a presentation, maybe about 15, 20 minutes to go through a demo. And then you'll have plenty of time for questions. And if for some reason we can't answer the questions now during the call, we'll answer them offline. So I wanted to talk to you about kind of the 5 W's, right? Who, what, why. Why is this important for us? So often organizations have issues when data or systems or applications are unavailable, they're incomplete, they're offline, or cost money to access them. Right, and it creates situations where QA engineers, developers are waiting for components upstream to become available. And oftentimes we'll use service virtualization to provide access to these systems that really don't exist. But creating these virtual services requires data, realistic data. And that data is hard to create manually. It's time-consuming, and if you want to create it from a live service, it can be difficult too, because we don't really want to give that live data to a non-production environment for maybe security reasons or cost reasons, right? So we create this virtual service to access it. It also becomes difficult to update the virtual service once it's created. So we're focusing now on the data part of updating this virtual service. So what do? Well, we can use CA Service Virtualization, or DevTest, and CA TDM Test Data Manager grid tools. Right? We'll hear a lot of these terms later. They're all kind of interchangeable. But we're going to use DevTest and the DevTest portal, and TDM and the TDM portal to show you how we can resolve some of these problems. Okay, this integration, it helps you update running virtual services, live virtual services with realistic or representative data. Lets you cover a wide range of testing scenarios, and we're going to use WSDL and RR pairs to do that for our demo. But there's other ways you can do that as well. You can do it from a recording. You can use different types of files. Right? It's really not limited to what we're going to show you, but we want to get something quick and dirty, right? Okay, so there are some assumptions. I'm going to assume that you have a TDM environment and a DevTest environment up and running. If you don't and you're starting from scratch, no problem, really easy. I just wanted to save us 5 minutes by getting some of this up and running, right? So what I did is I created a project in DevTest and in TDM in a version. And I just activated them, right? So it just created a new project, really just enter a name. I also created a data generator in TDM. Really simple, you just click on new data generator, give it a name. I can actually show you that after the demo if there's time if you're interested. I also created a connection profile to the database we're going to be using to store all this information. This is really just the database name, the port number, the username, password. Okay, really simple too. And I entered information for TDM to connect to the DevTest portal to update the virtual service. Okay, again, just you're adding a host name, a username, password. Really simple, straightforward stuff. I just plugged it in, saved us some time. I also started a virtual service, and I used RR pairs. You could use a recording, different ways to create a virtual service, and I started it so that it's up and running so that we can see that it's going to be updated with realistic data in real time without taking the service down. Okay, so those are the assumptions, the prerequisites before we jump into the demo. So I want to focus a little bit on TDM. I'm not sure if you're too familiar with TDM or grid tools. You're probably a little bit more familiar with DevTest and how DevTest works, and service virtualization and application test. But TDM is used to generate data. So first what we do is we register a file. This is a term we have. We register a file, and then we derive objects from that file. And we're going to use a WSDL in our example. So we're going to get a format, a layout, a template. Okay, we're going to import some RR pairs as sample data. And then we'll use that to define data generation rules and publish data that we generate into a database, right, that we specified in the connection profile. And then we're going to take that information from the database, we're going to export it and push it to the virtual machine, to DevTest. Okay, so we're going to import a kind of a template. We're going to specify variables, data generation rules, and then we're going to go and publish it out to the virtual service. If you could just put your lines on mute if you're not talking, just so we don't have any interference. Okay, so the data generation process. Again, step by step, I'll walk you through that diagram just to reinforce it. And I'll give you the steps of how to do it. We'll go through it in the demo and just some notes so that you can follow along on screen. But you're going to register a file. You register file objects so that you can perform data manipulation, data generation on them. You register the file objects in a context of a project and a version. Okay, so objects are tied to a version. And this gives us the information about XSDs, XMLs, WSDLs, JSONs, RR pairs that we can register as objects. And then what we do is we create derived objects in the database from the registered object. Okay, so we register a file and then we derive objects from that format. And the derived objects represent relational tables that you create out of the registered files, because the file objects, the WSDL, for example, includes non-relational data, so you can't directly work with it in TDM. So to work with them, we have to convert them to a relational model and store it in the database. So by creating derived objects, we convert the non-relational data into relational data model by creating tables in the database, and we register them so that they can be used as an object in TDM. Some of the terminology can be a little confusing, but basically we're making we're importing the information, the data, in the format. What do we do after that? So we're going to import some sample data. For us, it's going to be RR pairs. It's going to be a request and a response, XML. And we'll import it into the object that we derived. So after we register the file objects, which have non-relational data, and we create the tables in the database of the registered objects, we can perform some actions, right? So we can perform, we can import data into the derived objects. We can create data generation rules. We can publish the data and export it from the objects. We can delete it. We can drop the tables. All sorts of things we can do. After we've got the objects and we've got the data, we're going to create data generation rules. We're going to create some variables for this data. So we're going to take it from being kind of a template to being something that we can actually create different data sets from. Okay. And in our example, we'll create, well, I'll get to that in a bit, but basically these data generation rules, after you import the sample data into the tables, you're going to create a data generation rule, and the rules help you generate the data that can be published into the tables. Okay. And there's some tips and tricks I'll get to later in the presentation, just a few slides, and I'll explain during the demo for how you do that. But for our demo, we're going to be using something called, it's actually the Medicare demo, and we're going to search by zip code for a Medicare provider or a Medicare supplier's provider. So you're going to enter a zip code, maybe your local zip code, as the request, and the response, right, the results that you'll see is a list of providers for that zip code. You'll see the name, the telephone number, the address, et cetera, right? So we'll randomize the zip code field, and we'll randomize the, from a seed list, we'll create a list of companies and addresses and telephone numbers, okay? So that's how we're going to generate our data. After we've created the objects, we've defined the data generation rules, then we're going to publish them, right? So we're going to make these kind of formalized and push the data out into the database, and then we're going to export it and push it out to DevTest to a live virtual service so that it can be used. So you publish the data in a schema based on the defined data generation rules, and you export the same data in whatever format you'd like. First, we publish the data into the database, and we export it. We have to use non-relational data. So for WSDL, you export the file in XML RR pair. For RR pair, you can export it as an XML or JSON text RR. So there's different file formats you can use depending on the application. That process is pretty straightforward. We'll get to that too. And I'll show you how to make sure that the data is pushed out. I do want to call out quickly that there's a couple gotchas, a couple best practices that you can follow while you're using TDM and DevTest. So when you create virtual services, I mentioned this before, but there's no limitation to how you create the virtual service when you're using the TDM integration. There's no footnote here that says you can only create it using a WSDL. Okay, you can do it via recording or any other method. There's no limitation. Performing multiple operations. So when I register the file and I create my objects, it's going to be entered into the database. There's a way I can use the same WSDL, for example, and import it again as separate objects. I can just give it a prefix. Otherwise, it'll show up as duplicate in the database, and we don't want that, right? So I can use the same object multiple times. To identify these objects, right, since they're working with a lot of data, in our example, it's going to be pretty easy, but there's ways to filter in the portal. And there's also different schema names each time we import, we create an object. So we can use the schema name as a good identifier. And we also have a way to associate data, parent-child associations. So that's good to know. We'll use those in the example in the demo. Also, we advise that you use standard naming conventions. This goes for anything, but especially when you're dealing with request response transactions, you'll have a lot of different transactions. You want to file some kind of follow some consistency, some formal format. So we have, for example, a transaction name, transaction ID, and then dash request or dash response. Okay, this helps to identify the pairs of files. Okay, also once you create the connection profile or schema name, you probably don't want to change it. Sometimes things get mucked up or things get confused. If you're going to change it, just delete it and recreate a new one. Okay. Right, so I'm going to jump to the demo. If you do have any questions, you can ask them in the chat, and we'll try to respond to them afterwards. Or you can wait and we'll open up the phone lines. But I do want to show you
I don't see any questions as of right now. Just a reminder, you can enter them into the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and someone will go ahead and answer them. All right, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Thanks, Mo. Okay, so let me just explain to you how the demo is set up. So I've got two different machines, virtual machines. I've got a DevTest box with service virtualization. Everything's installed on one box. I've got the portal, I've got workstation, the registry, the database, the coordinators, simulators, everything running on one box. Okay, and I've got a virtual machine running on it. So let me show you that. Got a virtual machine, a virtual service called Medicare_VS that's currently up and running. Been running for about 2 hours. Okay, it's got 0 transactions, and we'll see the transactions come in when we do a test. I can also show you the virtual service, what it does. This is workstation now. Just give you a different view. So I've got my virtual service image. I've got my request, which is a zip code, right? I'm going to search by zip code for a medical supplier, and the response is going to be a medical provider. So here we have the name of the company, we have got the address, we've got the city, state, the phone number, right? So that's the kind of format that we're going to be using and following, okay? Let me show you now TDM. So I've got grid tools and the TDM portal installed. I've logged into the TDM portal. And remember the prerequisites and assumptions, so let me just show you that real quick. So I've got here, I've got a project called Medicare and a version 1.0. I've got other projects as well. But I'm going to go ahead and select that project. Really simple to do. You just click on the gear icon and you create a new project. I've got a data generator. Just, again, real simple. Click new generator and you create a new generator. This one's called Medicare generator. And of course, it's under the Medicare 1.0 project. This TDM portal follows the same layout as the DevTest portal, if you're familiar with it. Just take a second to call that out. So the project's up on the top. You've got some settings and administrative options on the top right corner. You've got along the left is your navigation. So this is the modeling section. This is generator section. This is the job queue, the submitted request item. And you've got configuration. Okay. So under configuration, I've got connection profiles. We mentioned connection profile to the database where our objects are going to be stored. This is our Medicare database. And I just called the profile Medicare profile. This is the URL for the database SQL server. So it's a SQL server. Also got information for the DevTest connection. Okay. So for this, I just specified the name of the DevTest box, right? That's the other virtual machine I showed you. You can get the IP address or the host name. Port 1505, this is our DevTest server port that we used, and I'd use the administrator user. You can use any user as long as it has administrative privileges to create and delete virtual machines, things like that, okay? And we've started our virtual service, right? We saw that's up and running. So that's our other our prerequisite. Pretty simple to do those if you don't have them set up, if you're not familiar with how that works. So going back to our workflow in TDM, the first thing I'm going to do is register an object so that we can manipulate it. So I'll go up here, I'll go to Objects, under Modeling, I'll go to Register New Object. You'll select the object type. You've got a list of different types of objects we can use. I'm going to use a WSDL, and I'm going to give it a name. I'll just call it Medicare. Okay. I'm going to click down here so that I can specify the file. Got some demo files already. It's a Medicare WSDL that I'm going to use. Tells you it's uploaded to the portal. Great. Now I'm going to register it so that I can manipulate it, and up here the job queue, see real quick before it disappears, it told me success. And that's going to be recorded down here in the submitted request section. We'll see that a couple times happening. You'll see that the job queue, the action success or fails will pop up on the top. It'll give you a link to click to it. If you want to see more information, go to submitted requests. I'll show you that in a bit. So we've got our object that's registered. Now we've got to create and register the tables. So it found some information in the WSDL, and this is the one this is our request, right, the get supplier zip code, right, that we're going to be using. So it found that, and we have to associate a connection profile to the database. So we'll use our Medicare profile, which is going to connect to this Medicare database we have. And if for some reason we already use this object, like I said before, you could just add in a prefix, and you can use the same WSDL again. We don't need to do that, though, because this is the first time I'm doing it. So I'll do create and register tables. And this will take care of our first step or our first and second step. Okay. Up here on the top, it'll say registered successfully, and now our object will refresh and we'll see the tables. Okay. I can show you, if I go to generators, let me take a look at our generator. See if there's no tables selected. So there's no tables associated with our generator currently. It's empty. So now let's go and let's bring in some data. Go back to our object under modeling objects. I'll select our Medicare object, which now has an object ID. Unique identifier, it's got its name, Medicare, WSDL type, it's registered, it's got a connection profile associated with it. And it automatically created this schema name, which we'll use later to populate the tables. Okay, so I'm going to click on the object. See a list of the tables, and over here on the far right, I've got some options. I can delete the data, I can drop the tables. There you go, drop the tables. Delete the data. These icons might be reversed. This might be import and export, but we'll go by the label because that's how it works. But I'm going to import some data. Okay, so I'm going to click on the import data icon. And just here to note this RR pair link ID, this is a alphanumeric request response link ID that identifies the RR pair. And you can make it whatever you want it to be. I do like RR, and then I do like 201, 301, whatever it may be. Kind of a unique identifier. And then I'm going to use my request and response information. This is my data, sample data, right, that we're going to use and kind of randomize or create variables from, right? And I'm going to say import to generator because I want it to now go to my generator that I created so that we can manipulate the data. And it'll go to our Medicare generator. I only have one created right now, but you'll see a whole list when you start using the product. And I'll say import. Okay. My job queue kicks up. It says request submitted successfully. If I click on this number here, you'll see it takes me here to the job queue under submitted requests, brought me to the modeling section of the log. It told me import data completed, gave me a date. If I click on it, it'll tell me the output, successfully imported data. It also tells me of the derived tables that was successfully created. And then I have other operations I did earlier. Okay. Okay, so now that we imported the data, I can go to the generator. Because we pushed it to the generator, I can select my Medicare generator. See, no tables are selected, but we'll see the registered tables and the schema that have been added. So let me go ahead and click here, and I'll select the tables. You'll see them get populated. And as I select them, you could have a whole list here, right? And these could be duplicates too. So you want to select the ones that you're interested in. First thing that I should do is make them relational, right? So this is kind of a magic piece where you're making the child-parent associations, and you're taking this non-relational data and making it relational, okay? So now let's select these items again, and you'll see we've got, this is a shredder operation. I don't want to get too much into it, but it's called shredding the data, and this helps us take non-relational data and make it relational. So let me select all of these items. Okay, so we've got everything selected. So let me show you what some of these things are. So here is an interesting one, right? This is our request. It's supplier by zip, and it shows us our zip code that we had. This is the zip code that we had from the request. And we want to randomize this, right? We want to make this automatically generated, make it a variable so we can generate data from it, right? Same thing with our response, where we have down here our response, our supplier data, our Medicare supplier data. They have a unique number, they have a name, right? Doc's Drugs, they have 1020 Maple Street, it's in Lisle, Illinois. Got a phone number, a telephone, they're participating or not, a description, okay? So they've got some information here about them that we're going to randomize to. So this gets a bit into TDM and how TDM works. I'll just kind of briefly go into it. To do it kind of quick, if you guys do want to follow along on the recording or try this on your own, I can give you the files, it's not a problem, and you can do it. So I'll just take a second to pause here when I enter the values, but what I'll do is put in, I use the data painter. When I click on the field, get some options, and one of the options, is data painter, a paintbrush. Very powerful tool. So let me click on that. It'll open up a new window that will allow me to create variables. There's different formulas, different functions I can use. This is a lot like Excel, where you have different functions from a database. We have seed lists that you can use for zip codes, for addresses, things like that. So currently I've got a fixed value. And what I want to do is I want to make a variable out of it. So I'm going to use this brand love function, and I'm going to use our seed list for US zip codes that actually has a zip code format as 5 digits dash 4 digits, right? So I'm going to use the first 5 digits, okay? So like that 1 over here. And we'll see that, I think, later in the address, city, state, you know, there's certain data I have that's formatted as a text file, and I'm going to use different parts of it. So 1 is the first column, 2 is the second column, 3 is the third. So this is zip codes, I'm going to use the first part of it. Now if I do validate, it should give me a checkbox, and it kind of creates a random, selects a random zip code from the list. So I'm going to do insert. And now we've got, if I click off the box, it'll validate it again, so I don't have to go into Data Painter. But now I've got my request zip code randomized. Now it's been manipulated in the generator to pull from a list of data. So I don't have to use that fixed one. I don't have to enter in 1,000 different zip codes. So let me do the same down here too. I'll do it for supplier ID. So I'll click here. I'll add in, I'm actually going to use something from our cars demo. It's a cars parts number, but it'll just give us a number, right? I validated, nice, okay. So I'm going to use a supplier ID. I have a company name. For the company name, I'm just going to use a list of companies, you know, ABC Inc., you know, Acme Incorporated, and just throw Inc. on the end, right? So that we'll get, you know, Bob's Tires Inc. So you can have some fun with these. Let me do the address. Just do a few more. This is address line 1. I'm going to take the first part of it. Same with city. I can do the same with the state. Where is it? State. For the zip code, I just want to use the previously supplied zip code, so there's a special function for that where it's a reference function. That references the request. Let me just show you that. Reference the request here. Get supplier by zip. I can do the same for the telephone number. There's a telephone number here. I can do the same for the description. I think I put those backwards, but that's okay. And I can put it for the participating. Are they participating? To just generate a random 2-digit number. Okay, so now I've got some of these items. I've got the data generation rules specified. Okay. Once I've specified my data generation rules, there's a lot more on this you get into on TDM documentation has, but for brevity, I'm going to kind of skip over getting into it anymore. What I can do is I can publish it. I'll publish the data, push it out to the database. I'll pause here for this screen, and you'll see all the names we selected, the schema name. It's going to ask us for some information. And ask us to select a connection profile, right? This is our Medicare database that I want to use. That's what it's saying. And select a schema. I'm going to use the schema it created already, right? Medicare 657. And repeat. This is the number of times you want to generate the data. So I'm going to say 10. All right, so we have 1 from the data we imported. So that's 1 plus 10 we're going to create. So we should have 11 in the database when this is done. Okay. Now I'm going to say publish. Our job queue will fire up. The operation is going to get executed. It'll tell us success. And go to submitted request in the queue. I can go to generator section now because that's where we were working. I can see publish was completed. I click on it. It says it was published to Medicare profile, Medicare database. Was completed. Okay. So now I can show you actually in the database. In SQL, I can show you the Medicare database, show you the tables were created and populated. And I can show you, for example, what is this, get supplier by zip code. I can show you that we have the original 60532 zip code, and then 10 more zip codes were generated, right, from our generator and published to the database. So the database was updated. Okay. Now that we've got the data, so that correlates with what the TDM portal is telling us, right? So now that we've got the data created, we want to export it and push it out to our, so this is it. This is the magic. We want to push this data out. We're going to use a REST API and export it RR pairs to push it out to our virtual service. So again, let me just show you the virtual service. Do a refresh. So it's been running for 2 hours, 20 minutes. It's running. There's no transactions. Okay. So we've got that done. Now we want to export the data. Go back to my object, my Medicare object, my WSDL, right? And just like before we imported, now I'm going to export. You click Export Data. I'm going to use my Medicare database. And it's going to ask the schema again, of course. We're going to use the same schema. I'm going to do the 11 files, right, because we had 11 zip codes. And I'm going to say Update Virtual Service. When I say Update the Virtual Service, it's going to push it out to the live virtual service. It's running on my virtual service environment called VSE. And it's called Medicare_VS, right? That's the same as the one we saw before. Okay? So we're going to push this data that we generated out to the VS. I'm going to say export, and it's completed successfully. And what we should see now is, let's go to our DevTest box, and we can see our Medicare VS, the data was updated and was restarted, and we have 0 transactions. Okay, so it was pushed out, so the virtual service was updated. So that's pretty much it. I can show you, maybe let's take one of the zip codes that we have. Just write this down. We've got 605.32, 278.30, 764.33. So what I can do is I can go to my DevTest box. I can open up like a SOAP. I can make up a test where I have the zip code as the request, and then as the response, I should get some of the data that we generated. So this is our default 605.32. We've got Doc Drugs, 1020 Maple Ave in Lisle. I put in a different zip code from the data that was generated. I get a different company name, different address, different telephone number, right? Do that again for another zip code that it generated, different company name. So it did update the virtual service. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to pass it back to Mel for questions.
Thanks, Dan. So just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can enter them into the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, or at this point, we'll also open the line up for questions over the phone line. So if you have a question you'd like to ask over the phone, you can click #6 on your telephone keypad to unmute yourself, and we'll pause for just a moment. If anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in. In the meantime, we have 2 questions in the Q&A box. Srini asks, do we have validation of the general data before exporting to the virtual service?
Good question. I'm not too familiar with TDM and all the options, so I'm going to say I don't know, and then I'll have to look that up and get back to you.
Okay. We have another question in from Suzanne. What does the shred ID indicate? Would this be to delete data after generation?
So again, I'm not too familiar with TDM. I focus really more on DevTest, so I'll have to take a look at that and get back to you.
Okay.
Hi,
go ahead.
Hey, this is Prima, and in the demo you said like it updated the virtual service. Does it mean it updates the VSI with more data, like special transactions? What does it exactly mean? I saw that when you export the data in the TDM to VSC, virtual service restarted. So does that mean the VSI is updated with more data from the TDM?
Yeah, so the live running virtual service got updated with data that we had generated from TDM, so that we can now run our tests against the updated virtual service.
So if we download the MAR file, the VSI should have more specific transactions?
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we have a few more questions in the Q&A box. Ravi asks, what happens if we use the data other than we have just imported from the tool?
Other than data we have imported from the tool. So you want to create objects in TDM, and then you want to manipulate those objects. So I'm not sure what other data you would use. You would have to use some kind of data that was uploaded to the TDM portal and registered as an object, and then manipulate that type of data.
Okay. Tim asks, can you bring up the VS in the DevTest portal or the WS showing the new RR pairs?
So we can export the data in different formats. Just like we can download the MAR file for the virtual service. There's different ways we can use the data and manipulate it. Yeah, we could do that.
Okay, let's see. Shivani asks, is there any way to integrate TDM with app test component of DevTest?
So we have, so just looking at DevTest as a whole, you can run your tests now against this updated virtual service. So your app test component, right, of your test cases, you can run those tests now against the updated virtual service. So I would consider that an integration if there's something specific, specific use case. If you could just provide a little bit more information. But this is fully integrated with the virtual service now, so that the data from TDM is now in the virtual service. So if you have any tests that are running against that virtual service, those tests would get updated with the new response from the virtual service.
Okay. We have a question in from Tim. Will the new RR pairs that were exported be available in the DevTest VSI?
New RR pairs. So the data can be exported from TDM. So it's in a database, right? So it can be exported from TDM in different formats. And what we used, it was RR pairs to update the virtual service. So yes, we did that.
Okay. What metadata is generated for new transactions? What about manipulating request arguments or think times? From Rick Brown.
So the think time, so this is part of, I'm going to say this is part of app test, right? This is part of DevTest. The think time can be changed. By default, it's 100%. If you want to introduce a delay, you can say maybe 50%, so that 1 millisecond would take 2 milliseconds. So you can manipulate that type of information using DevTest.
Are there any questions on the phone?
So, and if any of the questions haven't been answered, please go ahead and you can shoot me an email, or you can type it into chat, and before we close this out, we'll make sure to get some answers and post it back onto the community. So definitely check out the community update, and we can use that to follow up. And if you want to see any other demos afterwards, we can certainly show you that. The recording will be posted in the presentation as well. And if you do want these files, so if you do want these files to go through the demo yourself, that shouldn't be a problem. I can send those to you. We also have a weather demo that we use quite frequently, and TDM has quite a few demos as well, demo files as well, so that you can play around with those, including the script and the tutorial.
And we'll post Daniel's profile when we post the recording and the Q&A transcript later today. So if you'd like to reach out to him for those files, you can go ahead and do that. Any questions that haven't been answered in the Q&A window, those are TDM-related questions, so I will follow up with a TDM expert after the session today and get answers to those questions put into the Q&A transcript before we post the transcript to the communities. So keep an eye out for a webcast recap, which will be posted later today. That will contain the recording for today's sessions, a PDF version of the slides that were presented, and we'll also update the Q&A transcript to answer any questions that we weren't able to get to. Okay. So if there are no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. We're asking you guys to please rate the quality of the topic today. We appreciate your feedback on these, and we use that feedback to decide what other webcasts we're going to do moving forward. Other than that, keep an eye out for that updated Q&A and the recording later today. I want to thank Daniel and the DevTest team for doing today's presentation. It was really great. And I hope everyone has a great day. And thank you for joining.